Hi everyone, welcome back to a brand new chapter. Marcio here again with the Blueprint Essentials for ArcViz. Now in this chapter, we're going to talk about the user interface. And the user interface is a really cool feature and quite an important one for ArcViz interactive projects that you will possibly be creating. So it's good to get an understanding of how this works. You probably would have noticed that this is quite a long chapter. In fact, the longest of the course, because there are quite a lot of topics to be addressed. Now, although it seems quite simple when you think about the interface, creating menus, etc., there are quite a few processes involved, and it's important that we understand them and get them right. So because of that, I've made these classes short, but obviously the section is quite long. There's 16 classes in this chapter, but we've just broken them down into shorter sections so we can understand how it works. Now, interfaces are things that we see all the time now, aren't they? Even on your smartphone, on the computer, on a video game, with the ability to interact with things on screen. So it's something that we're used to seeing in everyday life. However, depending on the type of interface that you want to create, the amount of work will vary. Okay. Now, because of the project that we're working in ArcViz, I'll be able to show you some of the most commonly used features that you'll possibly encounter. And within these 16 classes, hopefully you'll get a good idea of how you can build your own interface in your ArcViz project. So we'll go through them steadily, bit by bit, so that you can understand them and be confident. And of course, you can feel free to revisit a particular section of the workflow because of the fact they're broken down into small bite-sized chunks. So if you're ready, shall we begin? All right, let's go. So what is a user interface? Well, it's literally everything, pretty much. Everything that you see here on the screen. For example, even in this one we're looking at in Unreal Engine 5, everything on the screen, from the buttons, the menus, the different panels, they all make up the user interface, things that the user can interact with within the software. All of the buttons, windows, etc. Okay, so they're all part of the interface. And this is obviously an interface specifically made for Unreal Engine, for controlling our game. So we're going to be thinking about how we can customize our interface so that it can adapt to what we need. Okay, so that it works with the controls within our game and that it provides a really interactive experience for our user. Now, so far we've got the commands, haven't we, for the control, so we can control the movement of the camera, of the character. But we'll also create the ability to initiate a menu. So you can adjust things such as the resolution, or adjust things maybe on a slider, or where you can click and drag a slider to change colors of materials, etc. That's all part of the interface. And you're going to be able to see how useful they are in ArcViz projects throughout this chapter. Some things that are quite common even in games are the ability to move sliders on screen, or to have a map in maybe the top right corner. Maybe where a map of a position of a racing car, for example. All those things we can include in the ArcViz projects, so you know where you are in the scene. Some parts of the interface are just to provide us with information, which is fine. Some information you can click on to interact with, to give you more data or more knowledge on the project. Some interface detail is shown all the time, and that's called a heads-up display. Basically, a display that's always shown on screen. Some of it you can access it. Some of it's just for the aesthetics of the way the game looks. And here in Unreal, we have some blueprints that are specifically designed for working with user interfaces. So to make our job of building an interface a lot easier. So we call them widgets. And every time you hear about widgets in Unreal, just remember it's related to the user interface. So we create a design in 2D, which interacts with our 3D game. Okay? So I have an interface here, which is related to the menu. And I'll show it to you. I'll push play now. So this is an initial menu in our game, and this is all designed for an ArcViz scene. And by the way, we'll create a screen that's similar to this one. Okay, it's practically the same. We'll change the text and some other things, but it's very similar. So what is this then? Well, I push play, and this is the beginning of the game, where I present the game with the options of how to start the game, how you can change the resolution, and go into the instructions to understand the controls, where you can see the buttons of how to move the character around and interact. And here we can talk about the company, the office, the studio, whoever you are, and a bit of detail about yourself. Okay, so the developer details and the exit button, of course. And we can also create some more interactive buttons in there, not just limited to these. So you can create any. For example, here, if I mouse over the options, there's also the ability to add sound. When you move over the buttons, you can do that. You can see they already highlight, don't they, and change color. So there's loads of things you can do. There's possibilities are endless, as they say, when it comes to interfaces. Now, of course, this does involve quite a lot of graphic work, similar to graphic design. Of course, this course is not focused on that. So, if you do have graphic design background, that will come in handy. But hopefully you'll be able to understand the principles of creating a menu like this together. For example, here's a nice feature. If I click the resolution, it has these checker boxes, brings out a menu and these things that pop out and slide. So it's very interactive, isn't it? And finally, we can push start to begin the game. You've got the loading circle going on, and then it starts and brings you into the project. So it's an interesting interface for us to study, but it's also quite complex. It seems simple at first, but as the classes go by, you hopefully start to appreciate the work that goes into creating even simple movement like this. Okay, because it involves large blueprint functions working in the background. Okay, so we'll try and understand this in the most simple way and step by step so we can get our head around it all. But I just wanted to introduce this to you because it'll be useful to understand what we're trying to achieve. So we'll create one exactly like this with the same functionalities, and then I can show you how it works in practice with examples. Instead of showing how to make all the buttons in the widget panel, we can build and see how each thing works, okay? Just as we've done in previous classes within this course. So here then, I'll just close that down, create a widget now to show you. Right click, and once you right click under user interface, create a widget, just here, widget blueprint. And this is also a blueprint class as well. I won't even rename it. I'll just show you its interface for now, so you can become familiar with it. And then in the next class, we'll go into a little bit more detail. So you see that when it opens up, there are quite a few parameters, just like in blueprints and nodes. Now, we won't talk about all of them because there are too many of them really, but we'll show you the main ones. And as we create the widget blueprint, you'll learn the principles of how it works. Now, for some aspects here, you need to have a specific goal in mind. Okay, for instance, if I want to create something specific, you'll look for what it is that you need to use, rather than just looking around thinking, oh, we'll try that, try this. You need to know what your plan is. Okay, so you go through the whole, rather than going through the whole list, we'll get familiar with the commands that we'll need. Basically, here now we have our interface, which is slightly different. It's a palette. It's not a graph. Okay, so it's a palette in which we can drop different features onto it, different buttons, etc. So this is our main panel. Okay, and it also represents our screen. These dashed lines around here represent the size of our screen. So whatever you add here, for example, a button, wherever I place it is where it's going to show up on my screen. Now, although you can also work as if you were outside the screen, you can work around the outside of it, and we'll talk about that later. These lines represent the screen. Just remember that, okay? So here we have our hierarchy panel, which is like the layers in software like Photoshop, in which you can work with layers. So one thing inside of another. We have the hierarchy laid out there. Okay, so you can parent things or put them underneath each other. Now, this canvas panel is our main canvas, and everything derives from it. Okay, so you also create the hierarchies here, and this is the details panel that we've already looked at in other classes. For each item you click on, you get the details related to them. And we have here an example of an image, okay, which is a little different. If you use this border, it's also a bit different as well. So as you add different items, you get different details that you can affect, but you can still use them in the hierarchy. And down here at the bottom, we have the animation and timeline panel. For those who are used to using sequence, it's almost the same. So you can create animations and develop the timelines for each animation here. You can see your compile results here, just like you can in Blueprints. The compilation of when your compile is done. And here are the buttons to compile as well. And save, browse to access the content, play to. So these are the important ones. And here, there is a big difference from the other blueprints because there are 3 interfaces in the widget. Okay, this is the designer part, which is where I make the design of our interface, how I can make it look good. Okay, all about how it looks to the end user. And then there's the graph, which is our event graph. The one we can access here is similar to what we were able to see in the blueprints, right? Because a widget is a blueprint. So there are so many different things, but then there are also some things that are the same. You can see at the bottom right, it tells you it's a widget blueprint. So you can create your design, work on the functionality with the blueprint and the variables and all that. So here, button 1 is relative to this button here. So I can get or set that on the graph as a variable. The details panel, which I like to keep on this side at all times, is useful as well. So here, everything I click here is shown here too. All right. So that's it. This is the basic overview of a widget. Now, in the next class, we'll dive into the creation of these different elements I've shown you, and hopefully you'll start to become more familiar with how things work progressively. Okay, so that's it for the class, and we'll see you in the next one, and we'll talk more about it. See you soon.